Back to our lead story now, and the new government's plan to ban foreigners from buying New Zealand houses. Well, many of them anyway. The National Party's finance spokesperson is Steven Joyce. Joins us now. Good morning.
Morning, Guyon. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. You said this couldn't be done. It looks like you were wrong.
Well, it's not actually a ban, is it? I mean, effectively they're saying they'll apply the sensitive land test, which is a process by which, of course, people can have their purchases confirmed. You go through an OIO test, so it's misleading to call it a ban. They're just saying they're putting it through the sensitive land test, which is a bit different.
Yeah, but they're saying that if you are not a New Zealand citizen or resident, then you won't be able to buy. So it is a ban, isn't it?
Well, no, because actually if you do the sensitive land test, there's about 6 criteria in it, and anybody that's buying land, this is where I think some of the detail would be useful. Because anybody that's buying land under the sensitive land test has to pass one or more of a number of specific criteria laid out in the Act. And being a foreigner and wanting to buy a house is not one of those criteria.
Well, it will be, I presume, when they amend the legislation.
Well, that's where it gets more interesting, and because I think it'll be a challenging piece of legislation to write. Because you've got all these sort of definitional questions of what constitutes land. If it's a sensitive land test, then what about an apartment on a 5th floor? Because they're saying that won't be able to be sold either. And then you get into this interesting debate about land which is being prepared for development. Because let's say there's a sort of 2 hectare piece of land on a border of a city with a couple of houses on it. Now they're saying if somebody wants to invest and build houses, then they can buy land. But what if there's already houses on the land? And these are all sorts of the questions, which is why I said yesterday I think it's...
You're still sitting here saying it can't be done.
Well, I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm just saying it looks like one of those ideas that might be able to work, but could actually be a little bit too clever because it's being jury-rigged into a system which it wasn't designed for. And then there's the bureaucratic cost and all that sort of thing, which they haven't talked about yet.
Let's have a look at your statement from the... Minister at the time, Todd McClay.
Yep.
He said on the 11th of September that a ban would cut across a range of existing free trade agreements we have with countries like Singapore, Australia, Korea, and cause considerable difficulty with China. Now they've accepted Singapore
and Australia.
So let's park that aside. And Australia has an exemption. But Korea there, the big one, was the biggest one that you signed, really, wasn't it? And,
well, no, there was another.
That's another argument. But
that's right.
So Korea, though,
Korea's an interesting one.
They won't have to renegotiate that now.
Well, they are saying that, and I think it would be very useful to see the official advice on that because I think there are contestable views. Because the inescapable fact, I mean, they point to a clause in the agreement around sensitive land, and fair enough for them to point to that. But the inescapable fact is effectively they'll be taking something from the Korean agreement in practice. That the Koreans up until now have assumed is fine. Of course, saying that the Koreans will be fine with that, of course, is not actually talking to the Koreans. So what would be interesting, because you've got 2 views, you've got our view and their view, what I'd love to see would be the official advice saying there's no risk in doing this.
And I'm sure the OAAs are being filed at this moment.
Possibly even as early as yesterday.
Yes. Let's cut to the chase here, though. Why are you defending the right for foreigners who don't live in New Zealand to be able to buy houses in New Zealand? Why are you doing that?
Well, there's 2 things. Firstly, it is, I think, even now finally admitted by the Labour Party, not something that's going to make any difference. I think that's the tenor of David Parker's comments this morning.
Well, you were saying 1,500 houses a quarter.
It's 1,500 houses a quarter.
Well, there's 1,500 houses a quarter that foreigners are buying. So why should they do that?
So now, hang on. Well, I suppose the other alternative view is why shouldn't they? If it's not having any impact on the housing market, why take away that freedom of somebody to sell a house to whomever they choose? If it's not actually doing anything wrong.
Yeah, but
it's
that's
just
the top 1% of New Zealand, isn't it? Who's
going to...
Well,
I'm sorry. That's completely judgmental and unfair. Just back up a little bit. The simple fact of the question is it something that's actually going to change anything in a positive way? Even the Labour Party admitting now this is a problem that was probably solved 2 years ago. They're only doing it because of their political commitment to do it. And they're trying to tell you that on the one hand, it wouldn't put house prices, it put house prices up to have non-residents buying houses. And now they're trying to tell you it won't put house prices down to stop non-residents buying houses. They're trying to win both sides of the argument.
So you were saying that New Zealanders should still be able to have the right to sell their house to whoever they want, regardless of that person is a foreigner.
What I'm saying is 2 points. One is it doesn't make any difference. It didn't make any difference in Australia, and it's highly unlikely to make any difference here. It's just restricting the ability of New Zealanders in terms of how they handle their own property. And the second point is that it does create risks with these trade agreements. Now, I think it's really important, and I'm not saying they won't get there with TPP. I mean, they've now got the talking stick, and it's their job to go and make sure that TPP 11 gets over the line. And it's also their job to make sure that they don't upset the Korean agreement. So I'm hoping, and I think the National Party is completely hoping, that they turn up home in a couple of weeks' time and they've got TPP 11 in the bag. Nobody would be happier than us because we think it's so important for New Zealand's future. But I'd just say to them, be careful, because what you're saying is this policy, which you've now agreed has no impact of any discernible amount, could potentially cause problems with either of those agreements. And I'm just saying, well, be really careful, because if it's only for a political win for the Labour Party, then that's actually quite a high test to start mucking around with New Zealand's trade agreements.
Thanks very much for your time. That is National's finance spokesperson Steven Joyce there, talking about Labour's plan to shut out foreigners from the housing market.